Everyone tells you to be louder, to post more, to talk more, to show more, to make noise, because silence looks like failure. But notice this: the loudest people aren't moving forward, they're just everywhere. Visibility isn't momentum, it's exposure. Meanwhile, the quiet ones are overlooked, passed over, still ignored, not because they lack value, but because they don't perform it. And that's exactly why this works. Silence gets mistaken for weakness, not because it is, but because it doesn't announce itself. The world rewards what it can see, not what actually matters. So the loud ones learn something early. If you repeat yourself enough, someone eventually listens. The quiet ones learn something else. If you wait, you disappear. That's the illusion. Because nothing disappears. It just moves underground. Progress doesn't always look like motion. Sometimes it looks like absence. And absence makes people uncomfortable. That discomfort is important. But most people don't know why. Here's the part no one tells you. Being loud is a strategy, not a skill. Noise creates the illusion of momentum. It feels like progress, even when nothing is moving. That's why loud people look ahead, even when they're stuck. Silence doesn't fake progress. It exposes the gap. And most people can't sit with that, so they talk, they post, they react, they explain, not to move forward, but to avoid stillness. Because stillness forces a question. Am I actually growing or just being seen? Most people never answer that. The quiet ones do. That's why they look behind, while something is forming. Silence creates space, and space reveals patterns. When you're loud, everything blends together. Opinions, reactions, validation. It all sounds like progress. But when you go quiet, you start noticing what repeats. The same people chasing attention, the same conversations looping, the same outcomes dressed differently. That's when something shifts. You stop reacting, you stop performing, you start choosing, not what gets attention, but what compounds. Quiet people don't move faster. They move cleaner. Fewer moves, less noise, more intention. And that's dangerous because it doesn't announce itself. There's no signal, no applause, just results. Showing up later. Being ignored feels like rejection. But most of the time, it's just misinterpretation. People don't ignore what's valuable. They ignore what they can't categorize. Silence doesn't fit into boxes. It doesn't ask for approval. It doesn't signal intention. It doesn't explain itself. So the system skips it. That's why being quiet hurts. Not because you're failing, but because you're invisible to shallow filters. Attention-based systems reward clarity, not depth. Depth takes time, and time doesn't trend. So if you measure yourself by reaction, silence will feel like loss. But if you measure by alignment, silence becomes protection. Most people don't want protection. They want reassurance. Quiet people choose differently. Here's what most people get wrong. They think being ignored means being left behind. But being ignored is often a filter. Noise attracts everyone. Silence attracts almost no one. And that's the point. When you're loud, you collect attention. When you're quiet, you collect clarity. Clarity doesn't feel good at first. It feels empty, uncomfortable, lonely. Because without noise, you can't hide from yourself. There's no audience to impress, no reaction to lean on. Just you, and the question you've been avoiding. What am I actually building? Most people never stay long enough to answer that. They make noise instead. Quiet people stay, and staying changes things. Silence removes the scoreboard. No likes, no applause, no immediate feedback, and that's terrifying if you're used to measuring yourself through reaction. Because without feedback, you have to trust your direction. Most people don't trust it. They need proof, they need confirmation, they need noise to tell them they're real. Silence doesn't do that. Silence asks something else. Can you keep going, even when no one is watching? That question separates people. Some stop, some turn back. Some get louder, and a few keep moving, not faster, not harder, just deeper. That depth doesn't show up on a feed, it shows up later, when things finally connect. Silence changes how you see time. When you're loud, you rush, you chase moments, you react to urgency. Everything feels immediate. Silence slows that down. You stop asking, is this working right now? And start asking, will this still matter later? That shift is subtle, but it's permanent. Quiet people play longer games. They don't need fast wins. They don't need visible progress. They need direction, because direction compounds, even when nothing looks different. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. From the inside, everything is reorganizing. That's why silence feels dangerous to others. They can't tell what you're becoming, and uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. There's a moment when being quiet stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling heavy. Not because silence is wrong, but because it's misunderstood. People assume quiet means unsure, or weak, or lost. They think if you were confident, you'd speak up. If you were capable, you'd prove it loudly. But that assumption is built by people who fear stillness, because stillness forces reflection, and reflection reveals gaps. Quiet people already made peace with those gaps. They're not hiding from them. They're working inside them. That's why silence often attracts pressure. People push you to explain, to justify, to announce. Say something. Show something. Prove something. But growth doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to consistency. And consistency is invisible. Until it isn't. At some point, you realize something uncomfortable. You're not being ignored because you lack value. You're being ignored because you haven't demanded attention. And attention has become the currency everyone is fighting for. The loud don't ask if they're ready. They just speak. They don't wait to be chosen. They interrupt. They don't refine. They repeat. And repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates trust, even when there's nothing solid underneath. Meanwhile, you're still preparing, still sharpening, still learning, still observing. You assumed quality would speak for itself, but the world doesn't reward what's quiet. It rewards what's persistent. And persistence doesn't need volume. It needs time. That's the part no one tells you. Silence isn't a disadvantage, it's a delay. A delay between who you are becoming and who the world is allowed to see. And that delay feels like rejection, only because you're standing in the middle of it. Here's the shift. Silence stops being passive the moment it becomes intentional. There's a difference between being quiet and choosing restraint. One is fear, the other is control. You stopped reacting. You stopped explaining yourself to people who weren't listening anyway. You stopped proving what was never questioned by those who matter. And slowly, something changes. You begin to see patterns others miss. You notice timing. You understand leverage. While they burn energy trying to be seen everywhere, you're positioning yourself to be undeniable somewhere specific. That's not hiding. That's compression. Pressure building in silence. Strength forming where no one is watching. The loud mistake movement for momentum. You don't. You wait. Not because you're unsure, but because you know when you move, it has to land. There's a moment most people never reach. It's when silence turns into gravity. You don't announce yourself. You don't warm the room. You enter, and things shift, because you've already done the work no one clapped for. You've already failed in private, already refined the edges, already answered the hard questions when no one was asking yet. So when you finally speak, it doesn't sound like noise. It sounds like certainty, and certainty cuts through chaos. People lean in, not because you're louder, but because you're grounded. You're not trying to convince, you're not selling urgency, you're stating reality. That's why one sentence from you carries more weight than 1,000 posts from someone else. That's why they remember you after the echo fades. Look around. Most people are exhausted from being visible, posting every thought, reacting to every opinion, explaining themselves before anyone even asked. They're loud and still invisible. You chose a different path. You let others underestimate you. You let them misread your silence as hesitation, as lack of confidence, as absence. And that misunderstanding became your advantage. Because while they were busy maintaining attention, you were building depth. While they were chasing validation, you were sharpening identity. You didn't rush to be seen, you waited to be undeniable. That's why when your presence is felt, it doesn't fade quickly. It lingers. It echoes. It forces recalibration. Not everyone understands quiet power, but everyone feels it when it enters the room. Here's where most quiet people fail. They confuse silence with waiting forever. They think restraint means disappearance. It doesn't. Silence without direction is just hiding, and hiding slowly turns into resentment. You feel unseen, unchosen, left behind. Not because you lack ability, but because you never decided when to step forward. Silence only works when it has an exit, a moment, a line you're willing to cross. You don't need to speak every day, but you do need a signal. A move that says, I'm here and this matters. The mistake isn't being quiet. The mistake is waiting for permission to be noticed. No one gives it. You take it once, clean, controlled, and then you return to silence. The moment matters more than the volume. Most people speak because they feel pressure. You speak because you've chosen timing. That's the difference. You don't enter conversations early. You let the noise peak. You let opinions collide. You let certainty dissolve. And only then you step in, not to add more words, but to resolve tension. One clear statement at the right moment outperforms months of constant noise. This is how quiet people take control without chasing attention. They don't dominate space, they define it. They don't argue, they conclude, they don't react emotionally. They reframe reality. That's why when you finally speak, people don't scroll, they stop. Because what you say feels inevitable, like it was waiting to be said by someone grounded enough to say it. After you speak, you disappear again. Not out of fear, out of discipline. You don't linger waiting for applause. You don't monitor reactions. You don't chase agreement. You let the words do what they were meant to do, because impact doesn't need repetition. It needs space. Silence after clarity is what gives it weight. That's why your presence feels different, rare, measured, intentional. You're not falling behind. You were never late. You were just refusing to trade depth for noise. And the world only ignores you until the moment it can't anymore.